Good morning. It's 10 o'clock and we're going to go ahead and get things started with this morning's webinar. My name is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and we are assisting with hosting the webinar for the ODOT Office of Transit, Chuck Dyer and his staff. So I wanted to just give you a couple of housekeeping items, and then I'm going to turn things over so we can get to the meat and potatoes of what you joined us to hear this morning. Housekeeping wise, on your screen, hopefully you see a chat panel, a conversation panel on the bottom left-hand side. If you don't, please look for a circle with a thought bubble in it on the bottom left-hand side of your screen and click on that. That will then display the conversation panel. During the presentation, we do have everyone muted. We would ask that you please post questions in that chat pod, and they'll be read off to the presenter so the questions can be responded to. We do encourage questions because if you have it, I can guarantee you there's at least one other person on this webinar that has that same question and just hasn't posed it yet. Also, it's best that you pose the questions while you've got the subject matter experts available to answer them for you. At the end of the webinar, we're going to unmute everyone and allow you to ask questions via the audio, but during the presentation we do keep everyone muted just to hold down on background noise. The other thing is that we are attempting to record the webinar. If we're successful, a link will be provided. If we're not, it's a good thing you're here and are going to be able to get the knowledge firsthand. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chuck. Are you ready?
I am ready. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thanks.
So I'll go ahead and get started. This is kind of a weird experience because I feel like I'm talking to myself with the quiet crowd, but with everyone listening, I will encourage you to ask questions along the way. Maybe this will be so clear that we'll have absolutely no questions along the way, but I'll be surprised. So if we're following along with the ODOT slides, excuse me, I'm going to go ahead and continue along. So Juana Hostin was going to be joining us today, but unfortunately she's not going to make it today. So you just get me today, and Macy Moore is available as well as Todd is available, and I think that's it from us here at ODOT, Office of Transit. And so this is just a little bit of review, and I just want to make sure we're all looking the same numbers as far as programs. So the rural transit programs funded at 4.0 million. The E&D is funded at 2 million. Administration's closer to $500,000. The UTP, which is 16.6 million. The OTPP, which is generally what we're talking about here today, is at 44.4 million, and that's there's no sub allocations in that. That's the entire program for both urban and rural. And then the STP, Specialized Transportation Program. The Specialized Transportation Program was $2.5 million. For the rurals in the room today, I do want to be clear, and because we created some confusion, so I want to talk about that a little bit. We had encouraged members, when you apply for the RTP, to apply for all your needs, inclusive of those that would be considered under the OTPP as well. And so we'll be reviewing the applications that are submitted under the RTP along with the OTPP as well. So if you submitted a need and a request under the Rural Transit Program to Todd previously, consider that request accepted by ODOT and will be reviewed. If there's additional projects that you feel that you were unsure about and you want to submit an application for, I'm going to suggest that you consider applying for the OTPP. But if you previously applied for that net need under the Rural Transit Program, there's no need to apply a second time. So I just want to be really clear that that if you applied previously, we got it. If you haven't applied for a need and you're a rural system, if there's some expansion or some other project you want us to consider, please go ahead and apply under the OTPP a second time, for a first time for that. All right, and so this is the final list of allocations to the programs, to the state programs, of the 70 million total. I do want to point out, with the way that the legislation was written, it's really important that we demonstrate a certain amount at 6.5 million and another amount at 63.5 million. So again, a total of $70 million. All right, so moving forward, we're going to talk specifically about the OTPP program. So in conjunction with OPTA, we developed these different tiers where we're dividing the funds between tier 1 and tier 2. And so for tier 1, which is 70% of the funds for the 2020 state fiscal year, um, the uh, the rules that are applying for projects eligibility are those that are consistent with FTA. So for the large urbans, that's capital only, inclusive of preventive maintenance, small under preservation, and for small urbans and rurals, it's capital operating and/or preventive maintenance. For preservation, I want to be important to remember that these are based on examples and not an exclusive or inclusive list, but these are just examples of capital type projects, facility upgrades, not new facilities, and or preventative maintenance. So we'll just quickly go along the remainder types of projects which all fall under tier 2.
Chuck, one
Yes.
question that came in the chat pod was, will copies of the PowerPoint slides be available?
Yes, we will email a PDF of the PowerPoint through our contact list. And if you're not on our contacts, feel free to email myself or one of Hostin, and we'll get that out to you. All right. So tier 2 is, I'm looking at the wrong screen here, is regionalism coordination, expansion of existing service, new capital. Again, project types, examples. We made it as open as we could. Continuing along with tier 2 is technology or cleaner fuels, looking for pilot demonstrations, infrastructure, or technology for scheduling, dispatching, Wi-Fi on vehicles, charging devices for electric vehicles as well. So again, examples, not an exclusive list. And finally, the last section under tier 2 is workforce initiatives and healthcare initiatives. There's a lot of those across the state. There's an important economic part of spending this money to demonstrate that we're helping the economy with the investment of the $70 million. So we're excited to see what kind of healthcare and workforce initiatives that get coming along the way. As previously discussed, we kept the tier 2 at 30% of the allocation, so 30% of the $44 million for this first year. We anticipated that some of the projects under the tier 2 may have a longer lead time, and there may not be as many projects to be funded for the current state fiscal year. With that in mind, we left the ability for ODOT to transition funds between tier 2 to tier 1, or likewise, if enough good projects are not received for that category. So for that tier, rather. Is there any questions? I hear that thing beeping. Okay, very good. All right, so this is the notice of, we did the notice of intent, and this was optional. I want to be clear, this was optional for all the systems, and we had 23 of the 34 rural systems give feedback, and 22 of the 27 urban systems. Of those received a total of $106 million per project. And I just want to be clear that, this was a big ask from the systems, and we're not going to be able to fund all of it. So with $44 million, we're looking at funding about 42% of that, and that's the current ask. We realize that not all systems applied, and that the final ask for the application may actually be higher. I thought it was pretty interesting to see that in the way that projects came in, tier 1 projects came in at roughly 68%, and tier 2 came in 32%. So that's really consistent with what OPTA and ODOT was thinking in regards to how to split the funding between those two different tiers. And that those tiers were basically derived from ODOT making the decisions based on the projects that were submitted with the letter of intent, and making decisions whether it would be a tier 1 or tier 2 category. When we get to the actual application, it will be a requirement for you to identify which tier your project is part of. All right. So if you guys do receive an award, this is kind of something, this is supposed to be an example of what you might see. So you have, for example, you would be a letter expressing that you have been selected for the State Fiscal Year 2020 OTP2 award, and you'll be required to enter an application into Black Cat. There is going to be a requirement to coordinate with the MPO and ODOT for STIP tip, right? So this will be assigning a PID number in the Ellis system. For the rural systems, I think you're very unfamiliar with the PID system and Ellis in general. That is something ODOT will be managing regarding the rural projects, but for the small urban and the large urbans, it will be consistent in how OTP3 funds were administered in the back in the previous years, where there's going to be a requirement to develop a PID. And Macy, correct me if I'm wrong, we actually developed those PIDs. So the PID whole, so let me make a correction. The entire PID development is going to be managed and initiated by ODOT, but for the small urbans and large urbans, the individual projects for the different areas will have their own PID or multiple PID numbers associated with it. And the reason for the PID numbers is for the STIP amendment and administrative modifications. So we use the Ellis system to develop the STIP. Many of the MPOs use the same Ellis system to develop their TIPs. So it becomes a one-stop shop for meeting all those requirements. And then lastly, we'll have to execute a contract between ODOT and the transit agencies, and the contract will reference a specific project or projects that are being awarded. All right. The proposed schedule is at the end of this week, ODOT will be making the announcement and opening applications. The applications would be due in FormStack. Again, application for the program is in FormStack, but once an award is made, you're going to have to follow the prompts through Black Cat. Two distinct processes. Everyone's going to be submitting in FormStack. Only those that are chosen will be completing the form in Black Cat. So August 22nd. So that's 3 weeks, I believe, 3 to 3.5 weeks. You know, if transit agencies don't feel that's long enough to respond, please go ahead and make some noise, enter comments in the chat box. But we felt like 3 weeks was a decent enough time to get some feedback to get some applications in. That's giving us about 2 weeks to make some awards, and about a month and a few days to get some contracts executed. No funds can be drawn down until the contracts are executed, but I do want to be clear that projects are eligible for reimbursement starting July 1st of 2019. So while you're submitting while you may not be able to draw the funds down until the contract's executed, you're allowed to request reimbursement for projects that have incurred costs starting July 1st of 2019. All right, so this goal here to spend the money, the state fiscal year funds are for that specific state fiscal year. And the state fiscal years, we here at the DOT want to be complicated, so we do it from July 1st through June 30th. And that's how the state fiscal year runs compared to the federal fiscal year, which is in October 1st, and compared to the calendar year, which is how probably the majority of the transit systems in the state operates their accounting state fiscal years. So for the first year, we're going to be looking for funds to fund projects that are going to incur costs during that state fiscal year. And within the application, you're required to identify what state fiscal year the expenses will occur. And if it crosses multiple state fiscal years, you're going to have to break those assumptions up in between the 2 years. And that's really important because of how the encumbrance process is, the obligation or encumbrance process is here at the state of Ohio. We are allowed to encumber funds within the state fiscal year. Once we cross that state fiscal year, we're not allowed to encumber funds any further. Once the funds are encumbered, they're protected, to say the least. They're identified for a specific project, but those funds are not able to be, once you pass the end of the state fiscal year, those funds are not able to be released and reassigned to another project. So once we end the state fiscal year, whatever encumbrances are in place will have to remain. And so if you have a project crossing different state fiscal years, we can allocate an award for within this state fiscal year and a second award, second contract, second encumbrance for funds within a different year. But that's an internal process that ODOT has to manage. But the reason we're asking for you to identify which year those funds are in is because of those requirements. We also want to try to match up there seems to be a lot of pressure, a lot of influence upon ODOT and the transit systems to see if we can actually get the money spent. So because of that, we're going to be looking to identify which projects can actually be spent within the current state fiscal year. If we have $70 million and let's say we do a good job of encumbering all the money for the $70 million, but on July 1st of 2020, a year from now, OBM gets the list of how much was actually drawn down against the 70 million. If we still have 55, 60 million sitting out there encumbered but not spent, it doesn't demonstrate to some people that the need was really out there and the need was real. I think it's really challenging. It's challenging for any program to go from 6 million to 60 million, or 6.5 to 70 million in our case, and to have shovel-ready projects in that case. So because of that, we're in the next few slides, I'm going to give some talking points on what kind of projects to look for that could be eligible in that sense. But within the application, you're going to be required, again, to demonstrate which years those funds will be expended. When will you send in the reimbursement to ODOT? And you'll see that May 30th is the end for the 2020 projects to allow time for processing against that PO by the end of the state fiscal year. And then for state fiscal year 2021 projects, we're allowing the projects to start June 1st through May 30th. So you can actually incur costs in a month prior to the beginning of that state fiscal year for those projects. So again, this will be outlined within the application. And if you have projects that are going to be running across multiple years, they could be funded out of partially funded for this year and maybe fully funded in the second year, but allows us a little more flexibility in setting up those POs and how we have to manage the PO process here at the state of Ohio. And lastly, the last point here is that any projects that are going beyond the state 2022 or beyond will all be lumped into the third category.
Chuck, there's a question that came in from Catherine. She would like to know who are eligible recipients for this grant.
Eligible recipients are public transit agencies that operate in Ohio. So this is the shell game on the bottom of that picture, if you've ever played the financial shell game before. So if ODOT funds a project for preventive maintenance, you can tell a story about what you did with those funds. So for example, we may fund a project for preventive maintenance, you may actually then set aside your local money that you would have spent on preventative maintenance to do something different, unique, or cool, right? You have your own rules for your local money. So if you're trying to build a facility, right, that's $4 million, that's going to require a certain amount of local match, or if it's matching with a federal grant, you can take that local money and set it aside and hold it for 1 to 2, 3 years, according to whatever your rules may be. Here at ODOT, we're looking to see what projects we can fund within this current state fiscal year. If you wanted to, let's say, extend service on Sunday where you previously had no service on Sunday, or extend service later in the evenings, right? We can still fund a project for a preventive maintenance, for the matching a capital bus, where then you take that local match and save it for these different projects. So ODOT will be able to demonstrate that the funds went to an investment for public transit, let's say maybe a little bit more of the traditional boring types projects, but you have the opportunity to tell your story to your state legislature about how you invest in the money to do some of the more innovative things that you want to do. So this is an opportunity for you to ask for funds to replace where your local match is, so that you can then do the creative things with that local match, where we have less strings with your local match dollars. You don't have to worry about the encumbrance across the state fiscal year and the requirements about the carry forward and such. Again, it all stems from ODOT looking for projects that we can fund within the state fiscal year. Okay, for planning purposes, our goal for this first year is to have every last penny encumbered by the end of March of 2020. And this is not just for the OTPP, this is for all of the programs. And I made that point earlier, the second bullet, that once the encumbrance crosses state fiscal years, those funds must be spent against that encumbrance. If the project is canceled, those funds are released back to the state and cannot be reassigned to another project. So it's going to be really important that these projects are completed when you're requesting the money, that and if we go beyond the state fiscal year with an open encumbrance, that those projects happen. And vehicles is a great example. So if we're providing match to a vehicle, the lead time on a vehicle can be 6 months to 12 months, maybe even longer. But by the time we order the vehicle, we know what it costs. And so we can create an encumbrance that's going to cross the state fiscal year, but it's going to have an exact dollar amount that represents what the contract for the vehicle is. And so as that project comes in, it'll be really important that you continue that project and we go ahead and pay against that PO. If we have another project that's a little more nebulous per se, where we aren't really sure what those costs are may be, or the cost is an estimate where we don't know the actuals, if that project comes in under budget, it's a much more difficult situation, right, to figure out how to spend those dollars. So it's going to be really important that whatever projects are selected across the state fiscal year, that those projects are good projects and that they are going to be completed. ODOT is requesting eligible projects for both tiers for future years. Essentially what we want to have a reservoir of projects that are available to fund, right, within any state fiscal year. So if we get into March and let's say there's 1 or 2 or 3 projects across all the programs that were canceled for whatever reason, and we have $250,000 sitting out there in March, it's going to be really important that we get that project encumbered for a specific project. And so we can go back to the OTPP and find the projects that weren't selected and inclusive of projects in future state fiscal years, and then have a conversation with the next eligible project in the ranking to determine if this is still a good project and if we can create a contract for it and get those funds encumbered. So ODOT is going to be looking for those reservoir projects for us to be able to fulfill the program, especially near the end of the year. And it's going to be important that agencies who do have large projects that are a few years out, they start putting those into the application itself. We need to mature this program over the years, and we need to start building a program that's bigger than just 1 year. Similar to how you manage your programs and your budgets and how ODOT on the highway side manages our program with roads and bridges. We're making funding commitments of future year funding 10 years out before the federal funds or state funds have even been collected at the gas pump for future projects. So we're gonna want to continue to mature the program in the very same way, where we start identifying potentially future projects to be funded under future allocations in future years. And so this is an opportunity for you guys to make a commitment towards a bigger project. Let's say you wanted to do a facility project. It's going to cost $4 million, require $1 million in local match money. You apply for $500,000 of OTPP but you know that the facility has to go through environmental and has to go through all these risks before it gets out there. So we have the ability to potentially make a commitment 2 to 3 years out, and as we get closer, that project will be continuing to move through its timeline, and we'll know for sure whether or not that project will happen within any one specific state fiscal year, and we could go ahead and make a contract and an agreement as we get closer to that. So,
Chuck, there's a question that came in the chat pod from Pam from Greenville. And it says, we were told that the amounts requested in the notice of intent was just an estimate and we wouldn't be held to that. Is that still true?
In the intent, that is true. Those are just estimates for us to get an idea. So that was the $106 million that was shared earlier. And again, split between Tier 1 and Tier 2 at 68 and 32%. That was to give us an idea of what projects transit agencies are thinking about applying under this program. Starts to give us a sneak peek on what the need looks like, but but you're not going to be held to those estimates. You're going to be required to enter specific projects into the application for the OTPP. So unfortunately, we're going to be asking you to kind of repeat some of this, but we're going to be asking for some refined numbers. But mostly, we're going to be asking for which year those projects are going to be happening in. Additionally, I think we're going to have to build something into the process where we get into the March timeframe where we do touch back to every grantee within this program and ask them about their project, how it's going, and do they expect to expend the funds towards that project, by the end of the state fiscal year, for us to have the ability to, while we're in this current state fiscal year, deobligate those funds against that PO and reobligate it towards a new effort. Because once we cross the state fiscal year, that deobligation, reobligation is not going to be an option. And if it's deobligated, it's lost to us as an entirety. So I hope that answered your question. But as the last bullet on this page, again, it's important for us to understand the need as the program continues to mature and more projects will become eligible as the industry begins to better planning with this funding. So ODOT's going to be continuing to work under the assumption that the $70 million will be there, and we should be able to build a program that demonstrates a need beyond just the current funding that's there. And that's the end of my slides. So now we can open up the lines for questions.
Okay. What I'm going to do is do a global unmute, which means if you're connected, you will then be able to unmute your line and ask questions through the audio portion. So if you have a party going on in the background, which happens sometimes in my office, especially when we have a webinar going on, you might want to ask them to hold it down a little bit, or just check your phone line if you know you don't want to ask questions to make sure you have yourself muted on your end. So I'm going to go ahead with unmuting everybody now. You're unmuted, and you should be able to unmute yourselves on your end.
All right, so we can go ahead and, is there any questions? You can continue to ask questions to the chat box, or you can ask them through your phone.
Yeah, you don't have to do *6. I can actually, Robert, I'll find you and unmute you real quick.
I have a question. This is Tina Bradley in Bowling Green.
Yes.
I was unclear, is this different than the state GRF dollars that we normally apply for, that we would have applied for in our grant application?
The OTPP is a little bit different, but as I said in the very beginning, we had encouraged the rural systems to apply for their entire needs through the normal grant program, the Rural Transit Program. So if there is a need that you didn't apply for within that program, I would encourage you to talk with Todd, but also make him aware of it, but also just apply through the OTPP process. But if you applied through the normal 5311 program, we have captured that request. We have captured that need already. No need to apply again.
Thanks.
There's another question that's come in via the chat pod, Chuck. I'm going to read this off to you. It's from Andrea at Lake Tran. Under capitalized maintenance, are tires, oils, lubricants, and or fuel eligible activities?
Fuel is not an eligible activity, but the others are.
Okay, we have another question from Kurt. Is this application for both years, or will there be another application next year?
The application is for the 2 years, and plus we will open applications again next year to make final selection. We're going to have to decide, we'll work through a process, since this is all new, of how we're going to make commitments for future dollars at this time. But we're going to request that applicants continue to make to submit projects for future years.
So with this application that's coming out this week, will that include requests for future dollars?
The applications coming out this week will be for projects within the current state fiscal year, the next state fiscal year, and any projects from state fiscal year 2022 and on.
Okay, Next question.
And let me back up a little bit. That's again partially develop this reservoir of projects in case we need to make some other funding. It's also to start building a program need out there. At this point, we're not going to make future commitments for future years at this point, but we want to start capturing those projects to understand what's out there.
Okay, so it's more like kind of a notice of intent on the future projects, that type of thing?
A notice of intent, that could work. It's more of a, yeah, because we're just not in a position to make the future year selections at this time.
Right. Yeah,
But
we would have to dig deep too, like, and make sure that we're all aligned, so it would take some time. That's why I'm asking too. So
yeah, and we need to do a little bit of homework on our end about how ODOT, to be consistent in the way that ODOT administers its programs and how ODOT makes these future commitments on the roads and bridges side. We want to do business in a very similar way. So again, a lot is happening pretty fast. So unfortunately, we're not in a position to make those commitments for future years this month.
okay, well, we could use some more time, but it's good to know to be thinking that way too for us. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question, and we've got quite a few of them, is purchase and installation of electric bus charging infrastructure an eligible activity under Tier 2 technology?
Yes, it is. That's a good example.
Okay, next question. And I think you kind of addressed this one already, but will you make commitments for both years?
At this point, we're making commitments to fund the current state fiscal year program.
Are these funds able to count toward part of a local match or replace local match to other grant funds for capital projects, for example, 5339 funds?
Yes, they are, and in fact, you can overmatch a federal grant with these funds if that's going to. I don't know how it's going to score, but technically, yes, it's going to be used to replace local match and be a local match because it's non-federal dollars for 5307, 39. I can't remember all those numbers, and 5311, 5310. Well, not 10. 5311, 5307, 5339. I'm mixing up my numbers, but yes, it can replace local match.
We can follow up after the webinar too, Chuck, once you've got the whole list of, what they can replace the local match on and send that out to everybody.
Correct.
Next question, are the non-revenue vehicles eligible under Tier 2?
Non-revenue vehicles under Tier 2, I would request that you consider the shell game, and if you have revenue vehicles, that you use our money as the match and you free up your local dollars to buy those non-revenue vehicles.
Okay, and then another question, how is RTP different from OTPP?
RTP is only eligible for the rural 5311 operators in the state. OTPP is open to all. We, as we were rushing through this entire process in the beginning, we encouraged the rural systems to request all their needs through the RTP, and we can bring those projects over to be competitively selected against the OTP program as an entirety. But the RTP is specifically only for 5311s.
And we had an intro to what looked like it was going to be a question or a statement from Robert at the BC RTA, but I haven't seen the rest of it. So, Robert, if you're still typing, go ahead and hit enter so we can start reading that off. Another question from Tina. If you need 5339 local match, then request under OTPP and not RTP, correct?
No, if it's just a 5311, you can request it in either place, but you just make the request once. We were trying to encourage all rural systems to put their ask and their request through the RTP, but that application has since came and closed. So if you didn't make the request there, I would encourage you to make the request through the OTPP and make sure Todd is aware. And Tina, we can give you a call and talk through this if you have any specific questions afterwards.
All right, and we're still
Next,
happy to take audio questions too. I
and
don't have.
that's going to go, I was going to say real quickly, that same offers for anyone listening on the webinar. If you have questions about how to be creative with an application, or you have a project that you're not sure is quite eligible, you may have other projects that are completely eligible and where that may not be as exciting as fun, but we want to fund projects that are going to be expended within the current state fiscal year.
So if we have a bus buy that where buses will start being delivered like in, say, March or May and June, and then you would pay them out in the that would be the 2021 fiscal year.
June would be, not May, right?
Yes, right. Okay, so that's okay to have as long as you have the exact dollar figure that's going to be charged.
Yes,
so
yeah. We don't want to make a commitment to a project that, has a chance of not happening in the future, right? Okay. Or coming in completely under the budget, because again, we can't re-encumber those funds if we're out of the state fiscal year those monies were allocated in.
Okay.
And Chuck, another question coming to the chat pod from Tina. She would like to know if you can extend the application due date to the end of September.
To application due date to the end of September. Let me back up and see what dates we had in here. We'll take it under consideration, and we'll make a decision by the when we make the announcement at the end of this week.
Okay, I don't have any other questions in the chat pod right now. Oh, one more just popped in. If we have a project that includes several transit systems through NeoRide, does each transit agency need to apply separately for their portion, or can we submit that as one application?
We would actually encourage you guys to submit that as one application. We would then make awards as individuals. So if the project was selected at partial or full funding, we would require each transit agencies to make the request in Black Hat at that second step of the process. So we would like just to see one application for the combined NeoRide effort. And again, contracts and awards will be done individually, not through one transit system.
Another question: for a construction project slated to begin in spring or summer of 2020 and last 1 year, should we complete the application and indicate this project is for state fiscal year 2021?
Yes.
That was an easy answer.
Yes. Submit the application this year that you're requesting funding for the next state fiscal year projects. Yes, we want to start seeing that list of projects, those longer lead projects that are out there. We want to start seeing them grow. Again, the first year there may be a challenge to do the tier 2 projects to fund 30% of the funding under tier 2, but hopefully by the time we get in the second state fiscal year, there have been enough projects identified to support that funding, because at the second year it'll be at 65-35.
And feel free to unmute your phone line and ask questions via audio if you don't want to type them in the chat pod. We didn't get anything else from Robert. He had put in "so to summarize," and then nothing else had come through. So Robert, you're unmuted too if you'd like to just ask the question or do the recap statement. I think you were going to type through the audio. We'd be happy to have it that way. But we don't want to keep everyone on here for an extended period of time if there aren't any more questions that are going to come in the chat pod.
I would just make the point one more time that, again, this is an opportunity for you guys to think creatively about what costs you are incurring and how you're using your local match, and how you may be able to subsidize the local match with some state GRF for the current state fiscal year, thus freeing up funds for you to do more creative projects, that don't have the strings that the federal and the state money have with it, or the hoops, because in some cases there can be a lot. So I want to encourage you guys to think creatively that way. And again, for the rural systems, if you made your request through the rural transit program, we've captured it. We're going to be reviewing it. If there's additional projects that you want to be considered that haven't been applied for the Rural Transit Program, I would encourage you to apply for those under the OTPP, so we can look at them as an entirety. And the letter of intent, the notice of intent that we did, partial submission from just not all the transit systems, but we had $106 million in request. We're going to be asking in the next round, encouraging all systems to apply, and we're going to be asking for what year those funds are expected to be drawn down and start organizing projects in that such manner. So if there's
doesn't sound like there's. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Bob.
Yay.
I think what I was trying to say when I was going to say, so to summarize, was that this is not business as usual this year, at least. We have to come up with projects that we can execute and spend quickly to show the state that we needed this money.
We lost Bob. To continue his point, this isn't a mature program where we've been identifying commitments and projects in future years. We are a good 3 months, quarter into the state fiscal year, and we have 3/4 of the year left. So we're going to be trying to identify projects that we can expend within this current state fiscal year. It's not going to be as business as usual in his words, where we're going to be able to fund projects that are going to be the most unique and interesting. We're going to be funding projects for operating assistance, preventive maintenance, where we know we can draw down the funds, thus freeing up those local match. So I think we lost you, Bob, but I hope I grabbed the intent of your comment.
Yeah, I think he muted himself. He must have been done.
I did.
Okay. Good. Well, we're glad we got your statement in there. And Chuck, it sounds like this has been an incredibly informative webinar for everyone, and what a fantastic opportunity for all the systems to be able to tap into this funding. So I'm sure if they have more questions, they can contact you or your staff directly, correct?
Yes, I would encourage you to reach out to your favorite person here at ODOT that you deal business with, or feel free to call myself.
Great.
And we'll be sharing the slides through email. We'll try to get them out today because Juan is not here, so we should be able to get that out anyway.
Yeah, and if the webinar recording was successful, we will also be sending a link out to that. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up.
I was going to ask, any last comments, Bob, or are we good?
Or anybody else?
I just think that this is a wonderful opportunity, and if we all don't think differently and outside the box and prove to the state legislatures that we needed this money and we could spend it, we won't get it again. So we got to be different. We got to be creative. We got to tell a story and get it done.
Cool. Agreed.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone. And we'll be back in contact with you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.